In numbers, suddenly, wonderfully, we were unafraid. This image comes from Mark Gillespie's essay, and it is a beautiful summary of the events that took place in terms of it being a confrontation between authority, those with power, legal power, physical power, societal power, and those who are standing up against that injustice. Note that the people in the crowd, the protesters, are young men, and they are standing up for themselves against a group that is very much united in being oppressive against them. My name is Bernadette Tedesco, and in this lesson I'm going to be looking at the Friday essay on the Sydney Mardi Gras March of 1978 by Mark Gillespie. So what's in this lesson? I'm going to give an introduction to the text. I'm going to look at some of the key ideas about protests that you might be inspired by. I'm going to talk about the context, audience, purpose, and form of the text and how these influence the piece of writing. I'm also going to be unpacking the vocabulary, text structures, and language features within the text. I'll be covering a number of study design dot points. In particular, I'll be looking at the role of mental text as models of effective and cohesive writing. I'll be looking at vocabulary, text structures, and language features used in effective and cohesive writing. The ways purpose, context, including mode, and audience shape writing. The range of ideas presented in various ways in the mental text, different language modes and the effects on structure and meaning, and the ways the purpose of the audience hones the use of language, so how the purpose influences the language use. Again, always pay attention to these boxes on the side. They will help define any key terms that are used and any difficult vocabulary. The essay was written in 2016 in response to the Prime Minister's formal apology. So 2016 in response to the Prime Minister's formal apology. It is Gillespie's first-hand account of the Sydney Mardi Gras March of 1978, meaning he was actually there during this march. The Sydney Mardi Gras is also known as the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, and it has become a famous celebration of the LGBTIQA+ history and their culture. It started in 1978 as a pivotal moment in the Australian LGBTIQA+ history. So it was a pivotal moment, marking not only a celebration, which is what we see it as today, of identity and community, but also as a significant turning point in the struggle for equal rights and recognition. These are some of the key ideas that come out of the essay, and they relate to the types of protests, the causes and risks of protests, and the consequences of them. The first idea is about collective protest, that group protests can have more power than individual protests due to the strength in numbers and collective action. Solidarity and unity increases the volume and reach of a message. So standing together, not just people who are directly impacted by an injustice, but the rest of the community helping and supporting, increases the volume, which means the message gets heard. It also has the idea of the importance of defiance and resistance against oppression and discrimination, that not defying oppression means that nothing changes and nothing improves. So it is important to resist. It also highlights that there is risk and sacrifice involved in protest. Personal risk and sacrifice, and communal risk and sacrifice. It looks at the historical significance of protests, that every generation may benefit from the protests of previous generations. And we see this through various movements, that the small steps that each generation is able to gain is built on by consecutive generations. And they contribute to social progress and the advancement of civil rights. There are a number of important context things that you need to know in order to understand not just what Gillespie is saying, but who he is saying it to and why he is saying it. The first one is the Stonewall Riot. On June 28 in 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn in New York City under the guise of enforcing liquor laws. So they went in pretending that they were checking on liquor laws, but really they were going in there with the intention of arresting members of the LGBTIQA plus community, in particular homosexual men. Instead of dispersing peacefully, as in previous raids, patrons and supporters of the LGBTIQA plus community resisted the discriminatory actions of the police, which led to a series of spontaneous, violent clashes between police and the members of the LGBTIQA plus community. So there was violence on both sides as a consequence of the community being sick of this oppression, being sick of constantly being targeted. In the past, they'd always been submissive, and in this instance, they decided to stand up for themselves. And the riots took place over a number of days. The next context you need to know about is the 1978 Mardi Gras March. It was set against the backdrop of the late 1970s. Australia, and this was a time when societal attitudes towards homosexuality were largely prejudiced and discriminatory. The march was initially planned as a celebration, so they originally planned this to be a celebration inspired by international gay rights movements, but it quickly transformed into a violent confrontation with police. And the last piece of context that you need to know about is the official apology. So on April 27th in 2015, Christine Foster, a Liberal Party councillor and the sister of the then Prime Minister Tony Abbott, moved a motion at the Sydney City Council calling for a formal apology to the original gay and lesbian Mardi Gras marches. And it was in response to this call, this motion for an apology, that the piece was written. It's also important to know who the author is. He is an anthropologist, so he's interested in humans and why they do what they do. Mark Gillespie teaches international students at the University of Sydney, so he still lives there and he's very involved in education. He's affiliated with the 78ers, so the 1978 march, people involved in it are known as the 78ers and World Pride. And he's liaised on a number of different projects, in particular with queer, migrant and refugee groups on a Sydney Declaration of LGBTIQA plus rights project. His audience are a number of different groups. The essay was originally posted in The Conversation on the 19th of February 2016. The Conversation is a not-for-profit online publication based in Melbourne, but it's published nationwide, and it's also read outside of Australia. It publishes research-based news and analysis, so it's not necessarily got a set of people who write for it, but rather people outside of The Conversation can enter pieces to be published. And it aims to have research-based news and analysis that can be easily read by people with non-academic backgrounds. The target audience for The Conversation is Australians and New Zealanders, but as I said, it's also read beyond Australia. Gillespie's piece is targeted at those parliamentarians who voted on the apology. So do you remember the motion that was passed for an apology? The people involved in the original march in 1978, and also 18 to 40-year-old Australians who likely don't know anything about or don't know much about that original 1978 march. So the context of the piece helps us understand who he's writing for, and this influences the different things that he puts into his piece, the different things he does to speak directly to those particular audiences. Also of note, there is a link below if you wanted to hear Mark Gillespie speak about the Sydney Mardi Gras and the ongoing LGBTIQA plus struggles on YouTube below. So if you want to hear him speak directly about it and the ongoing struggles, that's a good place to start if you're interested in this particular movement. There are multiple purposes for this text. The main purpose is to explain, both to explain what happened at the Sydney Mardi Gras March in 1978, in order to explain why it's significant that a formal apology was proposed. So some people will hear this call for a formal apology and go, why is this relevant? Why should there be an apology? And so he's explaining what happened and why that apology is important. The other purpose is to reflect on how far the movement has progressed. So looking at the rights of the LGBTIQA plus community in the past compared to now, and the needs and rights that still need to be addressed currently. His other purpose is to argue that there needs to be ongoing vigilance and social investment. So we need to be vigilant to make sure we don't go backwards, and we need to invest socially, mainly through education, to address the current struggles of the community. He wrote this as an essay. In particular, he wrote it as a formal essay, and this reads multiple purposes because of its flexibility. So an essay has the structure and academic rigor of an article, while it also offers the ability to include personal reflection and opinion. So not only is it structured and academic, it's also personal and allows him to give his opinion, which makes this perfect as a form of writing for protest. I'm going to start unpacking some of the vocabulary and text structures and language features in this essay. I'm not going to look at the whole essay, I'm just going to look at a couple of key moments. In particular, I'm going to look at the opening of the essay. As I do this, what I want you to do is think about how does Gillespie effectively engage his audience of 18 to 40-year-old Australians, so that audience that don't know about what happened in the original march. So what does he do to engage that particular target audience? On April 27, 2015, Christine Foster, a Liberal Party councillor and the sister of then Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, moved a motion at the Sydney City Council calling for a formal apology to the original gay and lesbian Mardi Gras marches. So in this opening sentence, there is some context being provided. It explicitly embedded in the start of the essay to explain to the audience why he is writing this piece and why it is relevant. It was passed unanimously. Notice that we've moved from a very long opening sentence, that's all one sentence, to this really short, sharp sentence. Gillespie uses these short sentences to emphasise the point, to draw attention to it and make it stand out because it disrupts the flow. So he wants us to pay attention to the fact that it was passed unanimously. No one disagreed with it, meaning that it was overwhelming in its support. The New South Wales Parliament is expected to debate a motion to offer such an apology in the first sitting of Parliament in 2016. So this lets us know that the motion is still to be debated, and so he wants to add to that debate by writing this essay. Is a formal apology warranted? Question. So again, it is a short, sharp sentence, and it's hinting at the purpose. To answer this question, some understanding of the prevailing oppressive social conditions affecting the lives of sexual minorities, now termed GLBTIQ communities, in Australia in the 1960s and 70s is required. So he says, he's phrased a question, why is the apology warranted? And he's explaining that to answer this question, which is going to be the purpose of his piece, he is going to give us some understanding of what this community was facing. in the 1960s and 70s. That's why this is required. This essay is required to answer this question of why an apology is warranted. It's quite explicit. So I don't even need like a statement of explanation or a written reflection to explain what the purpose is. It's quite clear. To answer this question, I need to explain what happened. What is needed too is a better knowledge of the actual momentous events that took place in Sydney between June and August 1978, when violent social unrest and public protests on the streets erupted with far-reaching effects for Australia that can now be seen in historical context. So he's referencing protest here. He's explaining what type of protest it was, that it was a collective public protest, and he uses adjectives and adverbs to create emotion. Momentous, violent, unrest, erupted. And so he's trying to help create that sense of emotion attached to this type of protest. And then we have the subheading, the March of 78. The subheadings are used throughout the essay quite deliberately to indicate a shift in time and a change of focus. On a cold Saturday night in Sydney on June 24, 1978, a number of gay men, lesbians and transgender people marched into the pages of Australian social history. I was one of them. So again, notice that shift in sentence length, again, to create that pace, to create that variation of pace, to draw the reader in, but also to emphasise he knows firsthand. He's an expert at what happened because he was there. Note the shift also in the voice from that formal opening of quite clinical, these are the events, this is the date, to now this quite personal voice on a cold Saturday night. We marched into the pages of history. Yeah, so it's becoming much more personal, which helps the reader connect with him, and it creates this more intimate feeling about the piece rather than that clinical dry essay. I'm now going to look at the middle of the essay, and before I do this, I do just want to give a little bit of an explanation. There's a part of this text that includes some derogatory wording, some insults that homosexual men faced, and I think that it is important to honour the words that Gillespie wrote, and so I will be reading these words. Even if it makes me feel uncomfortable, which is probably part of the point, I think, to make us, the reader, feel uncomfortable. Please forgive me and recognise that these words that I'm going to read aloud do not reflect my own feelings about homosexual people, and I also do not support or encourage the use of these words in any way. They are only being read out of respect for Gillespie. So the middle part of the section that I'm going to read begins with the subheading, Back to the March. The subheading, again, is used to indicate a shift in time and also to help keep the essay on track so that you could scan through and flick through the essay looking just at the subheadings to see where he's at in terms of what's happening in the march. We started off from Taylor Square in a festive mood. Chants rippled along the marches, strangers joined hands, and we sought to bring people out of the bars and into the streets to join us. Some did come out of the bars and joined us. Others lined up and watched the parade, but did not join in. Note the pronouns there, we and us. These are collective pronouns to show that they are united. We also have that imagery that's included, trying to recreate the energy and excitement of the march so that the audience understands the human side of the events, not just the factual side. I heard the commonly used Australian put-down of those times, poofters, hurled at us, ratbag poofters too. When we reached Hyde Park, we were denied entry. Note that this I is the last time he uses that personal pronoun. So up to this point in the essay, it has mainly been that personal pronoun I. But then around here, it starts to shift to we and us. And this one here is the last time he uses that personal pronoun I. It becomes the collective. He no longer is an individual. He is part of the group, the mob, if you want to take another word to call the collective. It's not until the consequences, the repercussions become personal that he shifts back into that personal pronoun I. It's quite an interesting way of explaining the power of that collective group. You'll note here the insults that I mentioned were coming up. They are quite jarring. And it's used to highlight that this was quite common, that these words were hurtful and they weren't seen as rare, commonly used Australian put down. And so it was quite an indication of where the Australian mindset was in the late 60s, early 70s to late 70s. Note again that short, sharp sentence to indicate the shock. When we reached Hyde Park, we were denied entry. It was unexpected. So we have those nice long sentences and then you get to denied entry. This is a significant turning point in what happens. Also note in this next part where it shifts to his and he, that it's setting us up to recognize the police as the opposition. They are not part of the collective we and us. Confusion reigned, and an officer in authority appeared intent on breaking up the march. His derogatory tone of voice and the way he hurled insults and abuse angered all within earshot. So we get this sense that they were justified in being angered. And again, note that imagery to help make us feel like we are there along with him, that we are hearing these insults along with Gillespie. It soon became clear that our open back truck that would have provided the disco music for a party and a platform for speeches in the park was to be forcefully confiscated and the driver arrested. We then realised it would be a mistake for us to enter Hyde Park at all. It's an interesting way to refer to a truck. Usually a car belongs to a particular person, but Gillespie says our open back truck. This is for all of us. The truck was there for all of us. It's sort of a collective ownership. It's a deliberate choice of words. At the front of the march, I remember a few split seconds of initial doubt that we would be able to do it, and then in perfect, bold, spontaneous unison at our success in breaking through the cordon of police across College Street, we shouted, "On to the cross!" King's Cross. So we have here that moment of personal doubt, and then giving over to the group. With an exhilarating surge of energy, we turned from College Street into William Street, propelled onwards with hundreds joining in behind us. We turned left into Darlinghurst Road, into the heart of King's Cross. We were sick and tired of being criminalised, pathologised, demonised, of being made to hide who we were and having our rights to live as human beings denied. Note that energy in the imagery being used, exhilarating surge of energy, propelled onwards, hundreds joining in. This really strong imagery helps us to feel the energy of that moment. We also have that tricolon, that criminalised, pathologized, demonized. There is a rhythm to it that creates memorability. It suggests that overwhelming discrimination and the titles that they were given, that feeling of societal and legal power being used to put them into this box to dehumanize them. We also have references to protests, having our rights to live as human beings denied. They were fighting against their dehumanization. And this is Gillespie highlighting the importance of getting your message heard, the importance of allies and collective power. That night we were in the streets and we were determined to get our message to as many people as possible. After marching down Oxford Street and seeing our numbers swell, As many people came out of the coffee shops, bars and hotels to join us, now we wanted to call on everybody in the cross to listen to our chants and come out and support us as well. See, we have that importance of bringing in allies, that collective power. We chanted out of the bars and into the streets. We wanted the whole world to hear our cries for freedom and the oppression that characterized our lives. In numbers, suddenly, wonderfully, we were unafraid. What a beautiful quote. In numbers, suddenly, wonderfully, we were unafraid. It talks about the power of the group, showing you that it's not just you experiencing this thing. It's not just you who is angry. It's not just you standing up alone, but you have the collective behind you supporting you. Here there was a direct parallel with Stonewall, for as with the New York Police Department, the New South Wales Police force faced an unexpected and vigorous resistance. So we have that contextual parallel to Stonewall that other members of the older generation of the LGBTQIA+ community will know about. So that's Gillespie drawing on an example for that particular audience to connect to. As determined as they were to put us back in our closets, there was no stopping us. Now we were coming out, and now we had straight people willing to join in and support us. So we have a couple of things happening here. We have that euphemism coming out of the closet, which means to be openly within the LGBTQIA+ community, and they were refusing to hide who they were. There was a lot of pressure, even legal pressure, to hide your homosexuality because of the consequences, and they were refusing to do that. We would not let them put us back in our closets. We were coming out. So he's using that euphemism to show the empowerment of this protest and helping them to fully embrace their identity. And not just that collective support that they had from the community was what was making it even more powerful. In Darlinghurst Road in King's Cross, we were cut off and ambushed with hundreds of police with dozens of wagons blocking us in front and from behind. Notice the connotations of that phrase, cut off, ambushed. This was a surprise attack. So an ambush is a surprise attack, often involving deception, like a hidden surprise attack. It also infers that there is violence and unfair tactics being used by using this phrase here. These were critical moments because in truth, the crowd would most likely have dispersed at this point. So we have here a really interesting use of paragraphing. So these paragraphs are quite short. They're often 2 sentences, 3 sentences long. This paragraph is 1 sentence long. So just like he uses short, sharp sentences to draw attention, this paragraph not only is a quite short sentence, but it's a single sentence paragraph. This is a moment of climax, a potential turning point, a drawing in of the breath for the audience as they read. He's used paragraphs quite deliberately, and you yourself could use this technique if you're writing any sort of piece in order to place emphasis on that climax right before the moment of extreme action. I'm now going to look at the ending of the essay. I want you to think about what is the effect of ending the essay with these calls to action that you're going to see in a moment. So as an original 78er, I welcome an apology by the New South Wales Parliament, but it needs to be a living apology. A living apology is one where Parliament affirms the need for ongoing vigilance so that the human rights of LGBTIQ people are respected and protected in law. So he is establishing himself as an expert. He's returning to the current context. So we've gone through the past, we're returning to the present, and that overall purpose of his essay, answering that question, why is an apology necessary? Then we have a call to action for the Parliament. Not just to apologise, but to make it a living apology. It also has to affirm the need for ongoing social investment in educational programs that create a more inclusive New South Wales community where differences are respected and where the power of diversity is celebrated. Okay, so he's saying we need a living apology, and this is what a living apology is. It's ongoing vigilance and it's ongoing social investment. That's what a living apology is. We welcome anyone who participated in the 1978 Mardi Gras with an interest in the apology to contact the 78ers Committee or the Pride History Group. If you are in Sydney for the Fair Day in Victoria Park on Sunday, February 21st, come to our tent and talk to us. So this is a call to action for the 78ers to get behind and support the call for an apology and to get together again, to sort of reunite. In the current international climate, with the re-emergence of fascist threats from all sides, there are too few places in the world that offer the hope of this kind of open society. Sydney and Australia more broadly could represent this kind of inclusive society. It will be a society where the role of the police shifts from suppressing the rights of minorities to protecting and even championing them. So this is the final call to action. We have the first group, the first audience, parliamentarians, we have who are deciding on the vote. We have the second audience, others who were involved in the 78ers march, and we have the third group, which presumably would be that 18 to 40-year-old group who weren't aware of that original march, but who still have the ability to have a voice and influence this movement. So what he's calling on that third group to do is to offer hope, to be that kind of open society, an inclusive society. Yeah, so he's calling for the rest of Australia and police within Australia to protect and champion those who need their support. I'd now like you to have a go at this activity. This is where I want you to connect the features of the text to the purpose. Every language feature in a text has a purpose. Write down what you think is the main purpose of each of the following techniques. We may have different ideas, and that's fine, but have a look back through at the notes that you might have taken from our analysis and think about what was the main purpose of each of these strategies. For example, for the first one, collective pronoun, we, our, the purpose is to create a sense of unity and help the reader recognize the group mindset, a collective protest with collective power. Have a go with short sentences, subheadings, and the call to action. Okay, so how'd you go? I've already gone through what I think the purpose of the collective pronoun we and our is. With short sentences, I think the purpose is to emphasize the point, to draw attention to it, and make it stand out as significant. For subheadings, I think that the purpose was to develop the ideas of the essay alongside the chronology of events, so to make sure things happen in time order. And for call to action, the purpose was to motivate the reader to take the author's message and act on it, to learn from his experience. So he ended in this way to get us to not just listen, but to do something about it and to learn from him. So in summary, the context of the Friday essay on the Sydney Mardi Gras March of 1978 is that it was written by Mark Gillespie, an LGBTQIA+ activist, and it was published on the Conversation website. The audience is Australian parliamentarians who voted on the apology, people involved in the 1978 march known as 78ers, and those who don't know anything about the 1978 march. The purpose is mainly to explain what happened, but also to reflect and argue for continued progress with the movement. And the form of writing is a personal essay. Some of the key ideas were related to collective protest, the importance of solidarity and unity, the importance of resisting, the risks and sacrifices that come with protest, and the historical significance of protest and how it moves through generations. There were a number of vocabulary, text structures, and language features that we were provided examples of, and we were shown how these can be used to great effect. And there were also a number of key terms that you could go back to if you are intending to write either a personal essay or even look into this particular movement more. Please join me in our next lesson, which looks at Emmeline Pankhurst's Freedom or Death.